I didn't flinch when his lawyer leaned back in his leather chair and smirked at me, like I was just another fragile, aging woman too sentimental to understand how finances work. The room smelled faintly of cigar smoke, although no one had lit one. Maybe it was just his arrogance. My soon-to-be ex-husband, Charles, sat beside him, arms folded, lips twitching with that same smug confidence he wore during the final 5 years of our marriage. They thought I had nothing. They thought I'd crumble. They thought I was naive. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Daniels, as it stands, Charles is offering you a generous settlement. Given your limited income and the fact that most marital expenses were paid by him, this is more than fair. He pushed a paper toward me, as though I should be grateful. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Not yet. Charles glanced at me with that bored, dismissive gaze he used whenever I questioned one of his late-night outings or business trips. For a moment, he looked almost irritated that I didn't react. "I'm sure you'll see reason," his lawyer added. The smirk deepened. Reason. A lovely word when one actually has it. The irony was that they still believed I had walked into this meeting blind. They had no idea that the woman sitting across from them had boxes, physical and digital, packed with documentation. They didn't know that for over a year, I'd watched quietly as Charles siphoned money from our joint account with the subtlety of a child stealing cookies and believing the crumbs wouldn't give him away. Not just a few withdrawals. Not just suspicious purchases. But exactly $37,482.19, traced down to the penny. Flights. Hotel rooms. Jewelry receipts he didn't remember. Cash app transfers to women I'd never met. Dinners at restaurants where he never once took me. And as the two men prepared to bulldoze me into accepting a laughable settlement, I realized something surprising. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned itself out months earlier. Now all I felt was clarity. Sharp, cold, righteous clarity. I reached calmly into my large leather folder, the one they dismissed as sentimental clutter, and laid down the first stack of printed statements. Thick ones. Color-coded. Tabbed. Dated. The lawyer's smirk faltered. Charles's eyebrow twitched. And the air shifted just slightly. "Before we discuss his offer," I said softly, "we need to review the money he spent behind my back." Silence. I placed a single photograph on top of the statements. Not of a woman. Not of a hotel room. But of Charles, standing at a jewelry counter, signing a $3,200 receipt with a flourish. Not for me. Never for me. And as his lawyer's expression sagged from amused superiority to sudden rigid caution, I realized something. They finally understood what this meeting really was. Not negotiation. Not pleading. But the beginning of a reckoning. And I hadn't even opened the second folder yet. Then the lawyer said something that made Charles's face drain of all color. "My name is Margaret Daniels, and I am 67 years old. Old enough to know what love requires. Old enough to know when someone stops giving it. And certainly old enough to recognize when a man mistakes your gentleness for weakness. I was raised in a small coastal town in Maine, where the motto was simple. If you don't have your word, you don't have much. My parents were the sort who paid bills early, returned shopping carts no matter the weather, and apologized for things they didn't do just to keep the peace. Good people. Honest people. People who taught me that relationships flourish when two partners tell the truth. But they never warned me what happens when one partner becomes addicted to lies. I met Charles when I was 41, already divorced once, already aware of how fragile second chances could be. He was charismatic in the way men often are when they want something. I mistook his attention for devotion, his confidence for competence, and his occasional carelessness for harmless oversight. For years, I told myself he was simply busy. That his forgetfulness was just stress. That the distance creeping in was just life being life. I had run a small bookkeeping business from home for decades. Steady, quiet work. Numbers behave. Numbers don't betray you. So perhaps it was inevitable that when betrayal did arrive, it would come in the form of numbers. Back then, I still believed people could be accounted for the way finances could. That if I just looked long enough for the pattern, everything would balance in the end. But as my 60s settled in, so did Charles's secrets. And the older I grew, the more he seemed to shrink, not physically, but morally. His excuses thinned. His stories contradicted themselves. And every time I questioned him, he'd laugh as though the idea of deception was beneath him. "You're overthinking again, Margaret," he'd say, patting my shoulder like a wayward grandchild. But I wasn't overthinking. I was noticing. And noticing turned into tracking. Tracking turned into documenting. Documenting turned into quiet, steady resolve. Because I'm not a woman who retaliates with chaos. I don't scream, throw things, or storm out of rooms. I document. I prepare. I present facts. So when his lawyer smirked at me that morning, I didn't feel insulted. I felt confirmed. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. And yet, as I sat across from those two men, their confidence starting to crack, I couldn't help but remember the night, months earlier, when I discovered the first clue. The very moment my instincts snapped into place. The night that changed everything. Because it began with a simple bank alert, and ended with a truth I could never unsee. Our household had grown quiet long before the financial deceit came to light. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that comes after decades of companionship, but the tense, uneasy silence that fills the air when something unspoken sits between two people. We had 2 children between us from previous marriages, both already grown. My daughter Elaine, a social worker in Vermont, and his son Jeremy, a dentist with an unfortunate God complex inherited directly from his father. Neither lived with us, but their presence, or absence, formed an invisible backdrop to our home life. Elaine visited often, usually with groceries and a gentle nudge for me to get out more. She had her father's humor and my sense of responsibility. She adored Charles in her early years, but something about him always made her alert, watchful, as though she sensed the surface-level charm he displayed wasn't entirely solid. Jeremy, on the other hand, treated me like I was an inconvenience, a barrier between him and whatever inheritance he believed belonged to him by birthright. He would breeze into the house, greet his father with loud affection, and barely acknowledge me. Looking back, it's no wonder he and Charles grew closer as the years went on. They thrived in mutual admiration, the kind men exchange when they see a reflection of their own entitlement in another. Our home life became a subtle battleground of loyalties. Elaine saw my exhaustion. Jeremy saw opportunity. And in the middle stood Charles, always favoring the person who most catered to his ego. I began to notice his dismissiveness growing sharper whenever I asked about finances. He'd wave me off, claiming he had it under control, that I should enjoy retirement, and leave numbers to him. He forgot, conveniently, that numbers were my profession. But the emotional shift didn't happen overnight. It came in small doses. A cancelled anniversary dinner. A series of unexplained late nights. A vacation he took alone, for clarity. There was one evening that stands out. We were sitting in the living room, television flickering softly, when Elaine called me. She wanted to stop by the next morning. I mentioned it to Charles, expecting the mild enthusiasm he usually forced. Instead, he sighed heavily. "Can't she give us some space?" "She's my daughter, Charles." "Yes, but she's always evaluating." That word hung between us. Evaluating. As though my daughter's protective instincts threatened him. He got up from the couch, mumbling something about needing air, and left the house for 2 hours. Elaine later told me she saw him downtown, laughing with a woman at a cafe. A woman who certainly wasn't me. "Maybe it's nothing," Elaine said gently. "Just keep an eye out." I did. 4 months. And the more I watched, the more the threads unraveled. Still I kept silent, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Because deep inside, beneath the pain and confusion, something clearer was taking shape. A plan. A quiet, patient plan built on evidence, not accusations. And that plan grew stronger the day I discovered his first secret withdrawal, small enough to overlook, but large enough to signal something was deeply wrong. And what I uncovered after that wasn't just troubling. It was devastating. It started with a bank alert on my phone. $462.17 withdrawn from our joint account at 11:48 p.m. A strange amount at a stranger hour. When I asked Charles about it the next morning, he shrugged. Gas and snacks on the drive back from the client meeting, he said, not looking up from his toast. Gas. At midnight. In a town he supposedly never entered. I nodded politely, making no comment, but inside something cold clicked into place. I opened my laptop that evening, pulled up our bank statements, and went through the month's transactions line by line. Nothing alarming. Nothing repeated. But I followed my instinct, the one honed from 3 decades of bookkeeping, and dug through older statements. That's when I saw it. Another withdrawal. Then another. Different cities. Different times. Amounts that didn't match anything resembling routine expenses. I created a spreadsheet, color-coded by location and category. The pattern emerged slowly but unmistakably. By the end of the night, the total was $9,000. 2 weeks later, $18,000. A month later, $26,000. And by the time I finished combing through a full year of transactions, the number sat at $37,482.19 spent behind my back. Hotels. Airline tickets. Restaurant bills with notes like, champagne for table. Cash transfers to names I didn't recognize. Mostly women, mostly 20-something if their profiles were accurate. Every line felt like reading a confession he never intended to give. The betrayal wasn't just the money. It was the carelessness. The assumption that I wouldn't notice. The quiet erasure of the life we built together while he enjoyed another life. Better funded, more exciting, and utterly unburdened by the woman paying half the mortgage. But the true fracture came when I discovered a receipt for a diamond necklace. $3,200. Purchased 3 days before my birthday. He gave me a sweater that year. A clearance rack sweater with the tag still attached. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I printed everything. Every receipt. Every transaction. Every hotel confirmation. I saved digital backups to 3 locations, including a USB hidden in a sewing kit he would never touch. 4 months, I continued gathering evidence. Quietly. Calmly. Methodically. My daughter visited during that time and noticed the change in me. "You're steady," she said softly one evening. "Not sad. Not angry. Just focused." She was right. Because by then I knew exactly what needed to be done. Not vengeance. Not sabotage. Just truth. Delivered plainly. Delivered precisely. So when the opportunity arrived, when he asked for a divorce under the guise of growing apart, I accepted with a serene smile. He thought I was relieved. He thought I was grateful. He thought I was clueless. And that was his greatest mistake. Because next came the investigation he never saw coming. Once Charles filed for divorce, expecting compliance, not resistance, I initiated the most meticulous investigation of my life. And for the first time in years, I felt fully awake. I hired an attorney named Marian Holt, a sharp, calm woman in her early 40s who had absolutely no patience for theatrics, including mine. "Bring me facts," she said. "Not feelings." Perfect. Facts were all I had left anyway. Over the next 3 weeks, I organized my files into labeled binders. Binder 1, Bank Withdrawals Binder 2, Hotel Records Binder 3, Airline Tickets Binder 4, Jewelry Purchases Binder 5, Cash Transfer Recipients Binder 6, Timeline of his business trips Binder 7, Asset Mapping Binder 8, Witness Statements Binder 9, Digital Screenshots. When I brought them into Marian's office, she blinked slowly. "Margaret," she said, "are you sure you don't want a job here?" I smiled. "Just make sure he doesn't keep the house." She flipped through the binders for an hour, occasionally pausing, occasionally exhaling in disbelief. His attorney will not see this coming, she murmured. Which is good. Men like him count on complication to confuse the room. You've done the opposite. This is elegant. Elegant. I liked that word. Marian then advised me to request a forensic accounting review. She wanted professional confirmation for the court, a neutral audit that would validate every transaction I'd already documented. The accountant, a quiet man named Theo, took 2 weeks. When he returned with his report, the numbers matched mine almost exactly. Your wife knows her way around finances, he told Charles during a joint call. Charles laughed dismissively. She balances checkbooks for fun. Then you should have been more careful, Theo said plainly. That was the moment Charles realized he was in trouble. But the true storm hit when Marian subpoenaed 2 hotel managers, 1 airline representative, and the credit card company. Every entity complied. Every record matched. He grew angrier with each revelation. He blamed the banks. He blamed misunderstandings. He blamed me for misinterpreting purchases. He blamed everyone except himself. Meanwhile, his son Jeremy sent me a text. You're making this harder than it needs to be. My father deserves peace. Settle quietly. I didn't reply. His entitlement wasn't my problem. And then came the discovery meeting. The one where everything would finally be laid out on the table. The one where his lawyer smirked at me, obviously confident that I'd crumble. But as I sat there, watching him mistake my silence for fear, I knew something he didn't. I had saved one final folder. The one labeled Additional Evidence, open only if provoked. A folder containing the receipts even Charles didn't know I had. And when I opened it in that conference room, everything changed. The turning point came not in anger, but in clarity, razor-sharp clarity. The night before the meeting with Charles and his attorney, I sat at my kitchen table alone. The house was quiet, clock ticking softly, my hands resting on the final unopened folder. The folder contained screenshots from a shared cloud account he didn't realize synced automatically to our devices. Photos taken in hotel rooms. Selfies with women I didn't know. A boarding pass for a trip he had sworn was work-related, even though his supposed conference location did not resemble the beach resort visible in half the photos. There was even a picture of the diamond necklace. The same one he never gave to me. But the photo that sealed my resolve was the last one. A smiling selfie of him and a young brunette at a rooftop bar. His hand on her waist. Hers resting on his chest. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was the reflection of the person who took it. A waiter, catching their embrace in the window's glare. It wasn't the woman who haunted me. It wasn't her youth or her smile. It was the look on Charles's face. Carefree. Proud. Liberated. A man living a life I was unknowingly funding. I felt no rage. Just confirmation. After staring at that photo for several minutes, I closed the folder, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed with the kind of sleep that comes only when a decision has already fully formed. The next morning, I arrived at the attorney's office early. I wore my best blazer, tied my hair back, and brought every binder with me, stacked neatly on a rolling cart, a quiet visual of what I carried into that room. When Charles walked in, he looked surprised by my calm. He expected tears. Or pleading. Or compliance. He expected the version of me he had shaped over the years. Quiet, accommodating, eager to avoid conflict. Instead, he found a woman who had chosen truth over comfort. His lawyer smirked only because he hadn't yet opened the first document. When the meeting began, he spoke to me as though I lacked comprehension, explaining Charles's settlement offer in slow, gentle tones. I listened. Patiently. Then I opened the first binder. His smirk stalled. Then disappeared entirely. The power shifted so abruptly I felt the air change. In that moment, I realized something profound. Revenge is not fury. Revenge is not destruction. Revenge is simply refusing to let someone rewrite your truth. And I was done letting Charles rewrite anything. So I pulled out the final folder, the one I had promised myself I'd share only if necessary, and laid it on the table. "This," I said quietly, "is the complete record of your client's financial infidelity." Charles's lawyer looked from the folder to me, as if reconsidering every assumption he had ever made about who I was. And then the smirk returned, not confident this time, but nervous. "Mrs. Daniels," he said slowly, "you understand this changes everything, correct?" I nodded. Because that was the entire point. And the consequences were about to arrive faster than either of them expected. His lawyer tried to recover, flipping through the documents with shaking hands. Every page he turned made Charles shift uncomfortably. The hotel records alone took 10 minutes to process. The airline tickets, another 5. The jewelry receipt made him wince audibly. But when the photos surfaced, clear, time-stamped, cloud-stored, his lawyer's professional facade cracked. "We need a moment," he murmured. They stepped outside. I didn't move. Through the glass conference wall, I saw them arguing quietly in the hallway. The lawyer was gesturing sharply. Charles's face was pale, his hands trembling. He kept shaking his head, but his lawyer pressed on, voice firm, no longer amused. When they returned, the lawyer's tone had changed entirely. "Mrs. Daniels, Charles would like to revise his offer." Of course he would. But I remained silent, letting him continue. "He is willing to cede the house entirely to you." "And the retirement account?" my attorney asked. "He's prepared to split it at 70-30. "And the vehicle?" "Yours." "And the remaining joint savings?" "All to Mrs. Daniels." By now, Charles was staring at the table, humiliated, quiet, deflated. But Marian wasn't finished. "Additionally," she said, "we will be pursuing reimbursement for all unauthorized expenditures totaling $37,482.19. His lawyer swallowed hard. "Charles is willing to discuss that." "Discuss?" Marian asked. "Negotiate," he corrected. "No," she said calmly. "Reimburse." Charles finally spoke, voice cracking. "Margaret, please, please." The same man who mocked my concerns, who lied to my face, who sneered at my questions, was saying please. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He simply wanted to stop the bleeding. But consequences are not cruelty. They are accountability. And the accountability had just begun. By the end of the meeting, the revised settlement was drafted. House, mine savings, mine vehicle, mine retirement, 70-30 split reimbursement. Full payment scheduled over 18 months legal fees, paid by him. When he signed the preliminary agreement, his hand shook so violently the pen tapped against the paper. He avoided my eyes entirely. His downfall didn't come with dramatic outbursts or bitter arguments. It arrived quietly, the way truth often does. Patiently, inevitably, thoroughly. The man who once walked taller than everyone in the room now slumped in his chair, as though the weight of his own choices had finally settled onto his shoulders. And for the first time in many years, I saw him clearly, not as my husband, but as a man who had never learned to value the person standing beside him. A man brought down not by my anger, but by his own arithmetic. And yet, even as justice settled into place, one final moment remained, the one I didn't expect. After the meeting, after the signatures, after the lawyers exchanged their formal goodbyes, I walked out of the building alone. The air outside felt cooler, cleaner, as though the world itself had exhaled with me. For a moment, I stood on the sidewalk, watching the traffic drift by. I felt no triumph, no gloating, no desire to celebrate. What I felt was relief, a deep, quiet release from years of doubt and unease. I drove home slowly. When I entered the house, the space felt different. Not empty, but available, as if it had been waiting for me to claim it fully. Elaine came by later that evening, bringing soup and fresh bread, sensing without words that the day had been heavy. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once studied those first suspicious transactions. She listened as I told her everything, from the bank alerts to the photos to the final settlement. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You never deserved what he did," she said softly. "I know," I replied. There was peace in the simplicity of that truth. 4 months afterward, Charles tried to contact me. Not to reconcile. Not even to apologize. Just to rewrite the story. He left voicemails filled with rationalizations. How he felt neglected, how he was unhappy, how the younger women never meant anything. But you cannot rewrite truth once it's been documented. I never responded. I spent those months rebuilding my life. I repainted the living room. I joined a local book club. I took long walks every morning, discovering new corners of the neighborhood I'd lived in for 17 years. Slowly, the anxiety that once settled in my chest dissolved. One afternoon, I drove to the ocean. The same coastline where my parents taught me honesty, resilience, and the strength of standing firm. I sat on a bench overlooking the waves and let the wind pull the tension from my shoulders. I wasn't grieving the loss of Charles. I was grieving the years I'd spent believing his version of reality. But even that grief felt purposeful, not painful. Because healing isn't forgetting. Healing is understanding. I realized something remarkable. The evidence, those binders, those receipts, those screenshots, had done more than prove his betrayal. They had restored my confidence, my sense of clarity, my sense of self. And with each passing day, I felt more certain that I had done exactly what needed to be done, not just legally, but emotionally. And yet, as peaceful as life became, one final lesson remained. A lesson I wished someone had told me decades earlier. A lesson I now carry into the rest of my life, and share with others whenever I can. If there's one thing I've learned from this chapter of my life, it's this: deception thrives in silence, but truth thrives in documentation. I used to believe that love meant overlooking small inconsistencies, turning the other cheek, choosing harmony over conflict. But harmony that depends on ignoring your own instincts is not harmony, it's self-abandonment. When someone shows you patterns of secrecy, dismissiveness, or entitlement, it's not your job to fix them. It's your job to protect yourself. Revenge, for me, was never about punishing Charles. It was about reclaiming my agency, my truth, my dignity. And the most ethical revenge in the world is simple. You let people face the consequences of their own actions. Without shouting. Without spite. Without losing your integrity. The binders, the receipts, the photos, they weren't weapons. They were mirrors. And a person who fears their own reflection will always fall on their own. Today, when women ask me how I stayed calm through it all, I tell them this. Calm is not weakness. Calm is preparation. And preparation is power. I rebuilt my life not because I was unhurt, but because I finally understood that truth, even painful truth, is a form of liberation. So if you ever find yourself questioning your intuition, doubting your worth, or tolerating the erosion of your peace, remember this. You deserve transparency. You deserve respect. You deserve a life that doesn't require detective work. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is gather your evidence, hold your head steady, and let the truth speak louder than your fear. Because when you present the truth, calmly, clearly, confidently, no smirk in the world can withstand it. And that's the real moral of my story. You don't destroy liars. You simply stop protecting them.